There is a version of the world that most people never see. Not because it's hidden, not because it's hard to find, but because most people are asleep when it exists. The world between midnight and 5 a.m. is a different place than the one you live in during the day. The rules feel different, the sounds feel different. The quality of the silence in a building that should have people in it but mostly doesn't, that's a specific kind of silence. Anyone who has worked the night shift knows what I mean immediately. The way a hospital corridor looks at 3:00 a.m. when the day shift noise has been gone for hours and the morning shift hasn't arrived yet, and it's just you and the hum of the lights in the rooms and whatever's in them, the way a security monitor room feels at 2 a.m. when you're the only person in the building and you're watching 8 feeds simultaneously and most of them show nothing, most of them. The way a gas station at 3:17 inches the morning becomes the entire world for a few minutes. You, the register, the fluorescent buzz, and whoever just pulled into the lot. Tonight, I have 4 stories from 4 different night shifts, 4 different people who clocked in expecting an ordinary night and clocked out carrying something that didn't wash off in the morning. Get comfortable. This one runs long, and every minute of it is worth it. 7 years of night shift nursing. And I want to be clear about what that means in terms of experience, because I need you to understand the baseline before I tell you what happened that night. 7 years of 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights on, 3 nights off, a medical surgical floor at a regional hospital in the Midwest that I'm not going to name specifically. In 7 years, I have seen things that would make most people reconsider their understanding of what the human body and the human mind are capable of under extreme circumstances. I have held the hands of people leaving this world, and I have watched people come back from places that medicine says they shouldn't come back from. I am not squeamish. I am not easily spooked. I have a high threshold for what registers as genuinely wrong on a hospital floor at 3 a.m. versus what is simply part of the ordinary strangeness of that environment. I need you to understand that, because what I'm about to tell you registered as genuinely wrong, and I don't say that lightly. This was about 2 years ago, a Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Nothing unusual about the shift going in. 12 patients on the floor, a mix of post-surgical recovery and medical admissions, the kind of load that keeps 2 nurses busy without being overwhelming. My coworker Paulette was working the other half of the floor. We'd worked together for 3 years at that point. Good communication, easy partnership, the kind of working relationship where you don't have to explain much because you already know how the other person thinks. The first part of the shift was routine. Medications at 9, vitals at 10, the steady rhythm of checking in and charting and managing the particular needs of each patient through the evening hours. By midnight, the floor had settled the way it does. Most patients asleep or close to it. The calls slowing down. The hallway going quiet. By 1 a.m., it was a normal night. Here is what I want to describe carefully, because this is the thing that started it, and I've never been able to explain it to anyone's satisfaction, including my own. At 3:08 a.m., I know the exact time, because I was charting at the nurse's station and I glanced at the computer clock. I became aware of a specific quality of silence on the floor. Not the regular nighttime quiet, not the ambient hush of a hospital after midnight where things are calm but still present. Something more total than that. I sat at the station and I listened. No call lights, no monitors alarming, no one pressing a button, no one shifting in a bed, no one calling out. Not a single patient on a 12-bed floor making any sound at all. I have worked 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. on that floor for 7 years. And I have never once, not on the quietest nights, not with the most stable patient loads, had a moment where 12 patients were simultaneously and completely silent. It doesn't happen. People wake up, people need water, people feel pain, people have bad dreams. People just need to talk to someone at 3 a.m. because 3:00 a.m. does something to people that other hours don't. The floor always has some level of noise, not at 3:08. I sat very still for a moment and then I stood up and walked to the hallway. The hallway was lit the way it's always lit at night. The overhead fluorescence on the lower nighttime setting That specific hospital corridor light that is neither dark nor fully bright. The light of somewhere that never fully sleeps. All 12 room doors were closed. No light under any of them from a television or a reading lamp. No sound from any of them. I walked the hall. 12 rooms. I checked each one through the small window in the door. 12 patients in 12 beds. All of them asleep. All of them still. All of them with the specific quality of deep sleep rather than the restless, surface-level sleep most patients do in a hospital bed. 12 people, simultaneously, completely deeply asleep. At 3:08 inches the morning, in a hospital, I stood in the middle of the hall and felt something I'm going to try to describe accurately. Not fear exactly, more like the sensation of being the only thing moving in a world that had decided to stop, like I'd been left out of something. I want to tell you about room 12. It's the last room on the left, at the end of the hall, the room furthest from the nurse's station. On that particular night, it was occupied by a patient I'll call Mr. H, an elderly man admitted 3 days prior for pneumonia, stable, improving, expected to discharge later that week. Room 12 is the room I had been walking past all night. Not because anything was wrong with Mr. H. His vitals were stable, his oxygen was good, he hadn't called for anything, he was sleeping well. I had no medical reason to enter room 12. I had done my 9 p.m. check and my midnight check, and both times he was exactly as he should be. But in 7 years of working that hall, I've never once passed a room 12 times without going in. Patients call. Something needs adjusting. A monitor beeps. Someone wants water. The baseline frequency of need on a hospital floor means you go into every room multiple times a shift as a matter of course. I had walked past room 12 times since 7 p.m. I had not been called in, not once. Standing in the silent hall at 3:08 a.m., I counted the times in my head, and 12 was the number, and the room was at the end of the hall, and the hall was silent. I walked to room 12. I stood at the door. I looked through the small window. Mr. H was in his bed. The same position he'd been in at midnight, the slow rise and fall of his chest visible from the doorway. Asleep, breathing, stable. But there was someone sitting in the chair beside his bed, the chair that family members use during visiting hours, the standard hospital-issue padded chair that sits beside every bed on that floor. During the day, family comes and goes, and those chairs are occupied. After visiting hours, and at 8 p., those chairs are empty. The chair beside Mr. H's bed was not empty. A figure was sitting in it. Not a nurse, not a doctor, not a staff member of any kind. I knew every person scheduled on that floor that night, and this was not one of them. A person sitting in the chair, facing the bed, facing Mr. H. I want to be precise about what I could and couldn't see through that small window in the door. The room's nighttime light was on, the low wattage ceiling light we leave on when patients are sleeping. It gave enough light to see clearly across the room. The figure was sitting with its back to the door. I could see the back of a head. Dark hair, a seated posture that was still in the specific way of someone who has been sitting in the same position for a long time, not moving, facing Mr. H. I pushed the door open. I said quietly but clearly, the way you announce yourself in a hospital room at night, "Excuse me?" Nothing. I stepped inside. "I'm sorry, visiting hours ended at 8. I need to ask you to." The chair was empty. I was looking at an empty chair. There was no one in the room except Mr. Time. H sleeping in his bed. I stood in the doorway, one hand on the door frame, looking at an empty chair that I had looked through a window and seen occupied 10 seconds before. The room had one door, the door I was standing in. The window was closed and locked. I checked it. The latch was engaged from the inside. One way in, one way out. The door I was standing in, nobody passed me in the hall. I stood in that room for a full minute, not moving, just standing. Then I went to Mr. H's bedside and checked his vitals, which were fine, perfectly stable. He slept through the whole thing without stirring. I stood and looked at the chair beside his bed, a chair that had been occupied, that was now empty, that no one had left through the only door, and went back to the nurse's station and sat down and didn't move for 5 minutes. Paulette came around the corner from her half of the floor at 3:25. She looked at my face and said immediately, "What happened?" I told her. She listened without interrupting. Then she went and checked room 12 herself, came back, sat across from me. She said, "His vitals are fine." I said, "Perfect." She said, "Was there any way someone was in there earlier and you just didn't see them leave?" I said, "I was at the station. I could see the hall. Nobody came out of that room." She said, "Window?" I said, "Latched from inside." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said very carefully, "You know, the families sometimes talk about things they've seen in the rooms when their person is," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Mr. H was discharged 2 days later, recovered well, went home to his family. I did not tell him what I saw in his room. I don't know what purpose that would serve, but I've thought about it many times since. I've thought about the 12 times I walked past that room without being called in, and about whether the thing in the chair was the reason for that, whether something in room 12 had arranged the night so that no one would come in and interrupt it. I've thought about the simultaneous silence, all 12 patients, all at once, at 3:08 a.m. Like someone had pressed a button, like the floor had been asked to be still for a reason I wasn't given. I've worked night shift for 7 years, and I believe in the scientific method and the evidence-based practice of medicine, and I cannot explain what was sitting in that chair. I cannot explain why the room was empty when I opened the door, and I cannot explain why, of all the rooms on that floor, of all the rooms I walked past 12 times that night, room 12 was the one I kept walking past. Like something in it already knew I was going to come eventually and was patient enough to wait. I want to start by explaining the camera setup, because the technical detail is actually important to understanding why what I saw was impossible. Not strange, not unusual, impossible. The building I was working was a 6-story office complex, standard commercial real estate, about 200,000 square feet of open plan offices, conference rooms, server rooms, break areas, the kind of building that has maybe 400 people in it during the day and exactly one person in it between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. me. I'd been doing overnight security at that building for 8 months at the time this happened, which meant I knew every camera angle, every blind spot, every quirk of the system. I knew which feeds got interference from the elevator machinery and which ones ran clean. I knew how the lobby cameras caught the street lights through the glass facade and what that looked like versus a person moving. I knew the system. Camera 7 was mounted at the north end of the 3rd floor hallway, facing south, capturing the full length of the corridor from the north wall to the south wall. Approximately 200 feet of hallway visible in a single feed. Camera 8 was mounted at the south end of the same hallway, facing north, capturing the full length of the corridor from the south wall to the north wall, the same 200 feet, the same hallway. From the opposite direction, every square foot of that hallway was visible on both feeds simultaneously. If something was in that hallway, it would appear on both cameras. There is no position in that hallway that camera 7 shows and camera 8 doesn't. I need you to hold that. My name is Kevin. I'm 34. This was 2 years ago. My shift ran 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., 7 hours in a monitor room on the ground floor with a desk, 8 screens, a coffee maker, and a radio. Standard overnight security walked the building on a set rotation, otherwise sit and monitor. The night in question was a Wednesday. Nothing about it was unusual going in. Building empty since 7 p.m. I'd done my 11:30 p.m. walkthrough, found nothing, settled in. My coworker, Steph, was supposed to be on with me, but had called out sick, which happens sometimes. I'd done solo nights before and didn't think much of it. By 1 a.m., the building was exactly what it always was at 1 a.m. 8 feeds of empty hallways and dark offices, and the occasional movement of the ventilation system in the ceiling tiles that you learn to distinguish from everything else within the first week. I was halfway through my 2 a.m. coffee. Camera 7 moved. Not the camera itself, the feed, something in the feed. I caught it in peripheral vision, the way you catch movement on a monitor. You're not directly watching. A change in the pattern that your eye registers before your brain does. I looked at camera 7, the 3rd floor hallway, North end looking south, empty corridor. The office doors on both sides closed. The emergency lighting doing its low-level job at the far end. The overhead fixtures dark. Nothing moving. I looked at camera 8, the same hallway from the south end looking north, nothing moving. I told myself it was the ventilation, an air pressure shift in the duct above the camera, making the housing vibrate slightly, which happens. I'd seen it before. I watched both feeds for 30 seconds, both empty, both still. I looked away at 2:14 A. By the timestamp burned into the footage, which I confirmed afterward, I looked at camera 7 again. There was a person in the hallway, standing approximately in the center of the 200-foot corridor, roughly 100 feet from camera 7's lens, facing the camera, standing completely still. I sat forward in my chair and looked at camera 8, the same hallway, from the opposite end, the same 200 feet of corridor, empty, no one there. I looked at camera 7, person, standing still, facing the camera. I looked at camera 8, empty hallway. I looked at both at the same time, screens side by side, the same physical space, captured from opposite ends at the same moment. Camera 7, a person. Camera 8, nobody. I want to tell you what I did in the next 30 seconds, because it tells you something about the kind of security guard I am, or was at the time. I did not reach for my radio. I did not call Chief Briggs on the emergency line. I did not initiate the intruder protocol. I sat there and tried to explain it. Okay, camera 7 is glitching. There's a video artifact. Something in the feed is producing an image that isn't real. This happens with older camera systems. But this was a new system installed 18 months prior. I'd never seen a feed artifact on it. Okay, camera 8 is the one with the problem. Maybe it's frozen. Maybe it's not showing a live feed. Maybe it's looping old footage. I checked camera 8's timestamp, updating in real time, live feed. Okay, there's something wrong with my perception. I'm tired. It's 2:14 a.m. My eyes are playing tricks. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Camera 7, still there, same position, facing the camera, not moving. Camera 8, empty hallway. 30 seconds of trying to explain it, and then I picked up the radio and called Chief Briggs. Chief Briggs answered on the second call. I told him there was someone on the 3rd floor. He told me to wait for him to call the police line and not to approach until backup was in the building. I said, Chief, I need to tell you something specific about this. He said, what? I said, camera 7 is showing someone in the 3rd floor hall. Camera 8 is showing the same hall empty. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, check both timestamps. I said, both live. I already checked. He said, is someone in the hallway or not? I said, that's what I can't tell you. He said, Kevin, I said, I know. I'm watching both feeds right now. Camera 7 shows a person. Camera 8 shows an empty hallway. Same hallway. Same timestamp. A longer silence. Then he said, don't go up there alone. I said, I wasn't planning to. Police arrived at 2:31 a.m., 2 officers. I showed them both feeds on arrival. Camera 7 still showing the figure in the same position. Camera 8 still showing empty hallway. One of the officers looked at both screens and said something quiet to the other one that I didn't catch. They cleared the 3rd floor. Empty. Every office, every bathroom, every supply closet. Empty. No sign of entry through any window or stairwell door. All alarmed, all undisturbed. Nobody on the 3rd floor. When the officers came back to the monitor room, I pulled up camera 7. The hallway was empty. The figure was gone. I pulled the footage back, found the 2:14 timestamp, played it forward. The figure appeared at 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 7 seconds. It stood in the same position without moving until 2 hours, 29 minutes, and 43 seconds, 15 minutes, and 36 seconds. Then, it simply ceased to be in the frame. Not walked away, not moved out of the camera's angle. Between one frame and the next, it was there, and then it wasn't. I pulled camera 8 footage for the same window. Empty hallway for the entire 15 minutes and 36 seconds. The same hallway, the same time. 2 cameras that between them cover every inch of that space. One showed a person standing in it for 15 minutes and 36 seconds. One showed nothing. Chief Briggs pulled the footage the next morning, Had the camera system checked by the installation company, full diagnostic. Both cameras functioning correctly, no glitch, no artifact, no technical explanation for a feed discrepancy of that nature. I filed my incident report. I described exactly what I saw and when and for how long and what the police found. The installation company representative who reviewed the footage told Chief Briggs, and Chief Briggs told me that he had no technical explanation for why two cameras covering the same space would produce different images at the same timestamp with both confirmed live. He said it shouldn't be possible. I said, I know. Here's the thing I think about most, more than the technical impossibility of it, more than the 15 minutes and 36 seconds. It was facing the camera 7 specifically, the north end camera, the one that showed it. It was standing in the center of the hallway, 100 feet from the lens, facing directly toward camera 7, not toward camera 8, not toward the stairwell or the elevator or any exit, toward the camera that was capturing it. Like it knew which one was showing it. Like it knew camera 7 was the one I'd look at. I've thought about what that means, what it implies about the nature of what was in that hallway, whether whatever it was had an understanding of the system that I only had because I'd spent 8 months studying it, whether it was trying to be seen by me specifically, and whether the 15 minutes of standing still, patient, not moving, was waiting for something. I don't know what. I never gave it. I handed in my resignation 2 weeks later, not because of this specifically, or not only because of this. I told Chief Briggs I needed a schedule change and day shift didn't have openings. He said he understood. He didn't ask me to explain further. I think he'd looked at that footage enough times by then that he didn't need me to before story 3 and 4. We're 2 hours tonight, 4 complete stories, and if you're still here, you already know this is your kind of content. Hit subscribe right now. New videos every week. New places, new shifts, new things that happened in the hours when most people are asleep and the world runs on a skeleton crew of people who see things nobody else sees. And drop a comment. Tell me which story is getting to you so far, the hospital room or the camera feed, because story 3 and 4 are the ones that had me sitting with them the longest after I heard them. Here we go. I want to tell you something that's going to sound strange before this story makes sense. I looked forward to seeing him. I know how that reads. I know what you're thinking, but hear me through the whole thing before you decide what to make of it. Because the looking forward to it is actually the most important part of the story. The fact that I came to rely on it, the fact that 3:17 a.m. became an anchor point in the worst stretch of the night shift, is what makes what happened afterwards so much harder to sit with. I was 27 when this started. I'd been working the overnight at a gas station in a mid-sized city, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., the kind of shift that pays slightly better than day shift and attracts the kind of person who has reasons to be awake at those hours. I was paying down debt. It was a means to an end. I wasn't precious about it. The overnight is its own world. I want to say that first. Anyone who's worked it knows. The people who come in between midnight and 5 a.m. are a different population than the day customers. Some of them are on their way to early shifts. Some of them are on their way back from late ones. Some of them are the kind of person who operates best when everyone else is asleep and doesn't care to examine why. You learn to read people fast on that shift. You learn the regulars. He first came in on a Tuesday night in October. I know it was Tuesday because I'd been doing an inventory count that I only did on Tuesday nights. And I remember looking up from the clipboard when the door chimed. Medium height, maybe late 42nds, dark jacket, the kind of face that doesn't give you much to read. Not unfriendly, not warm, just neutral in a way that some faces are naturally neutral. He came to the counter, put down a bottle of water and a pack of peanuts, the exact same size and brand of each, paid cash. Said thank you in a way that was genuine without being particularly invested, and left. Nothing about it was notable. 3 minutes and 17 seconds past 3 in the morning. I didn't check the clock until after he'd left, and the timestamp on the register receipt was 3:17. I didn't think about it again. He came in the next Tuesday, 3:17 a.m. Same items, same cash, same thank you. I noticed, but barely. Some people are creatures of habit. Some people work the same route every night at the same time. It happens. Week 3, Tuesday, 3:17, same items, same transaction. By week 4, I was noticing before he arrived, not checking the clock nervously, just becoming aware around 3:15 that 3:17 was coming. The mild anticipation you feel when something reliable is about to happen, like knowing the coffee maker timer is about to go off. By week 5, I will be honest with you, I had started thinking of him as a fixed point in the shift. The 3 a.m. stretch is the worst part of the overnight. Everyone who works it knows this. The gap between midnight and the first light is manageable, but 3 to 4, 00 a.m. has a quality that's different from the hours around it, a heaviness, a particular kind of alone. Having something reliable in that hour, even something as small as a regular customer you don't even really talk to, changes the texture of it. He became my 3:17, and then week 6, he didn't come in. I sat at the register until 3:30, then 4, and nothing. He didn't come. I told myself he had a different shift that week, or he was out of town, or something normal had adjusted his routine. He came in the following night, not Tuesday, Wednesday, which was the first irregularity, and not at 3:17, at 2:51 a.m. I looked up when the door chimed, and it was him. And I noticed immediately that it was 2:51, because 3:17 had become a reflex. He came to the counter. He put down a bottle of water and a pack of peanuts, same items. And here is where I want to be careful, because what I'm about to describe are small things, individually very small things. And I need you to understand that each one alone meant nothing. It was the accumulation of them in one transaction that added up to something I couldn't shake. Put the items on the counter and I rang them up. And when I said the total, he looked at me for just a half second longer than usual before he reached for his wallet. Not a stare, just a beat, a fraction of a second more than the transaction required. I said, "Just these tonight?" He said, "Yes." He said it looking at the items on the counter rather than at me. He paid. I gave change. I said, "Have a good night." He said, "Thank you." Both the right words, both said correctly. But the rhythm of them was wrong. The way a sentence sounds when someone is translating it slightly in their head before they say it, a just perceptible lag between hearing and responding. He took his bag and left. I stood at the register and tried to figure out what had just felt wrong. He came back Thursday, 2:51 again, not 3:17. Same items, same cash, same words, same lag, and something else on Thursday that I hadn't caught on Wednesday or hadn't registered consciously on Wednesday. When he put the items on the counter, he put the peanuts down first and the water second. In 6 weeks of watching him, 6 Tuesday nights, he had always put the water down first. Every time. I hadn't consciously tracked this. I hadn't sat there making notes. But when he put the peanuts down first on Thursday, I noticed it the way you notice when someone you know well uses their other hand to wave at you. You don't know you knew the original way until the original way isn't there. Friday, 2:51, same items. On Friday, he said thank you before I gave him the change, not after. On Friday, when he turned to leave, he turned left first, then corrected. The door was on the right. 6 weeks of leaving, he turned right every time without thinking about it, because that's what your body does when it knows the space. It moves without consulting your conscious mind. On Friday, his body didn't know. It turned left first. I didn't work Saturday, scheduled day off. When I came back Sunday, I told my manager, Tommy, who worked the overlap with me, that there was a regular I'd been seeing and I needed to know if he'd come in while I was off. Tommy checked the log, described the transaction, water and peanuts, cash, around 2:50 a.m. both Saturday nights. I'd been off. I asked if Tommy had noticed anything about him. Tommy said, "The guy, he seems kind of out of it, like he's doing the transaction on autopilot." I said, "Does he seem like the same person as usual to you?" Tommy looked at me for a second. Then he said, "What do you mean, the same person?" I said, does he seem like himself?" Tommy said, "I've only seen him twice. I don't know what himself looks like." I said, "Right. I need to tell you what I eventually did because it's the part of the story I'm most conflicted about. On Monday night, when he came in at 2:51, I said to him, casually, conversationally, "You used to come in on Tuesdays." He looked at me and said, "Did I?" Not did I used to come on Tuesdays, not yeah, I changed my schedule. Did I, like, he was receiving new information about himself. I said, for about 6 weeks, every Tuesday at 3:17, same thing every time. He looked at the bag in his hand, the water and peanuts. Then he looked at me, and this is the part I've thought about in the year and a half since it happened. He looked at me and said, "That sounds right, not that sounds like me." Not, yeah, I guess I'm a creature of habit. That sounds right. Like he was confirming a detail from a description he'd been given. Like someone had briefed him on who he was supposed to be. He kept coming in after that. 2:51, same items, correct words and slightly wrong rhythm. Body that didn't always know the door was on the right. I don't know what happened to the 3:17 man. I don't know if something happened to him in the week he didn't come in, if he had a medical episode, an accident, something that changed the particular quality of his presence in the world in a way that I, from behind a gas station counter at 3A, was somehow in a position to detect, I don't know if I was detecting something real or detecting my own expectation violated. I do know that the thank you stopped coming before the change. I do know that the items changed order. I do know that his body forgot the door was on the right. And I know that when I told him about the Tuesdays, when I described who he had been to him, he said, "That sounds right," in a voice that was listening, not remembering, listening. Like I was telling him something he needed to know. I want to start with the practical reality of a factory night shift before I get into the story, because the context matters. And if you've never worked one, you might not fully understand why what I'm describing is impossible in the way that it's impossible. On a manufacturing floor, at least in every facility I've worked, every person present is accounted for. Sign-in log at the door, time-stamped, physical signature, every entry and exit logged. Shift supervisor's head count at the start of every shift. Again at break, again at the end. This is not bureaucracy for its own sake, it's a safety requirement. If there's an incident on the floor, a machinery issue, a chemical event, something that requires evacuation or a head count in an emergency, you need to know exactly who is in the building and where. You cannot be on a factory floor at night without a record of being there. There is no way around it, except apparently there is. My name is Conrad. I'm 38. This happened 3 years ago at a manufacturing facility about 30 miles outside of a mid-sized Ohio city. A plastics component plant. Nothing glamorous. Injection molding and assembly work, the kind of facility that runs 24 hours because the machines don't care what time it is. I'd been on night shift there for 2 years, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The floor was usually 8 or 9 people through the night, supervisors, operators, a maintenance person, and whoever else was scheduled. My supervisor, Tanya, was the shift lead, meticulous about head count. The kind of supervisor who knew exactly who was on her floor at any given moment. I'd worked under her for 18 months and I trusted her operational awareness completely. The night in question was a Thursday, midwinter, dark by 5 p.m., and the kind of cold that makes a factory floor feel warmer than it actually is because outside is so much worse. I signed in at 9:50 p.m. Tanya counted 8 people on the floor at the 10 start. I knew all 7 of the others by name. The first time I noticed Morris was around 11:30 p.m. He was at the station next to mine, working the secondary assembly line that ran parallel to my primary line, doing the job correctly, the quiet efficiency of someone who knows the process. I assumed he was a temp. The facility used temp labor regularly for the night shift. It wasn't unusual to have someone you didn't recognize. And temps were signed in and counted the same as permanent staff, so his being there wasn't a flag. I gave it no more thought. Around 12:30 a.m. during the line check, I walked past his station. He said something to me about the output rate being slightly high on his section, a genuine observation, a useful one. I checked his line, and he was right. I adjusted the feed speed. He said thanks. I said, good catch, normal interaction, nothing unusual. At the 2 a.m. break, I was in the break room with 4 of the other floor workers. Morris wasn't there. Some people skip breaks, not unusual. My colleague Derek asked me who the new guy was. I said, which one? He said, the one on line 4. I haven't seen him before. I said, must be a temp. Derek said, I didn't see him sign in. I said, you watched the sign-in log? He said, I was right there when the shift started. 8 people. I know all 8. I said, maybe he came in late. Derek said, maybe. He said it the way you say maybe when you don't believe. Maybe, but you don't have an alternative. I didn't think about it again until 3:30 a.m. At 3:30, I needed to check the master schedule for the following night's staffing. I went to the supervisor's station where Tanya kept the binders. She was there making notes on her clipboard. I asked about the following night's numbers. While she was looking it up, I said, hey, who's the temp on line 4 tonight? I want to note the output adjustment for the shift report. She looked up, she said, what temp? I said, line 4, the guy who's been running secondary assembly. She said, Conrad, I don't have anyone on line 4 tonight. I said, he's been there since the start of the shift. She put the clipboard down and looked at me directly. She said, I counted 8 people at 10 o'clock. I know all 8. There is nobody on line 4. I said, Tanya, I talked to him. At 12:30, he flagged a feed speed issue on his section. I adjusted it. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, show me. We walked to line 4, nobody there. The line was running, the output was correct. Whoever had been running it had kept it properly maintained and the product moving. The station looked exactly like a station that had been competently operated all shift, but nobody was standing at it. I looked at the adjacent stations, the workers at each one. None of them were Morris. I said he was right here at 12:30. Tanya looked at the line, looked at me, walked back to her station, and pulled the sign-in log. 8 signatures, same 8 I knew. No additional entries. She said, you said he talked to you. I said, at 12:30, he flagged the feed speed on his line. I went over and checked it. She said, and the feed speed adjustment was necessary? I said, yes, the line was running high. She said, so he was right. I said, yes. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, what did he look like? And here's the part that started making everything worse. Because when she asked me that question, I realized that I had spent approximately 3 hours on a factory floor with someone working 10 feet away from me. And I could not describe him. Not in any useful way. Not in any way that would distinguish him from 100 other men on 100 other factory floors. Medium height, work clothes, the standard uniform of someone on the floor. I couldn't tell you hair color with any certainty in the light we work in. I couldn't tell you age beyond somewhere in a wide range. I couldn't tell you anything specific about his face. I had worked 10 feet away from him for 5 hours. I had had 2 direct conversations with him, and I could not describe him. Tanya watched my face while I tried. Then she said quietly, I'm going to check the cameras. The facility security cameras covered the floor, not every square foot, but the major sections, and line 4 was in a covered area. Tanya pulled the footage. 10 o'clock shift start, 8 people on the floor. Tanya's count was right, 8 people. She advanced through the footage to the 12:30 timestamp. She found my station. She found the moment I walked to line 4. She found me on camera, clearly, adjusting something on the line, looking at the output, stepping back. She looked at me. She said, Conrad, who were you talking to? I looked at the footage. I was standing at line 4 making the feed speed adjustment, alone. No one beside me, no one at the station, no one anywhere near that section of the floor. I watched myself on that footage, check the line, make the adjustment, and respond to someone who wasn't there. I watched my own mouth move and the empty air where Morris had been. Tanya suspended the footage review, took me off the floor for the rest of the shift, had me sit in the break room, sent the maintenance guy to check line 4's operation. Maintenance confirmed line 4 had been correctly operated all shift. The feed speed adjustment Conrad had made was appropriate and had improved output. Something had been running line 4 correctly all night. Something that signed nothing in, showed nothing on camera, looked like nothing I could describe, and knew the machinery well enough to run it at a professional level for 6 hours, and flagged a problem that needed fixing. Tanya filed the incident report. I don't know what she wrote in it. She didn't share the wording with me, but she told me afterward that the camera review was going to the facility manager and the security company. She said it in a way that told me she didn't expect them to find an explanation either. Here is the thing I cannot stop turning over. The thing that gets me more than the camera footage or the sign-in log or the absence of any describable face. It was doing the job, not wandering the floor, not causing trouble, not doing anything that disrupted the shift or created a problem for anyone. It was running line 4 correctly, producing output, flagging issues when they came up, doing the work the way someone would do it who cared about the work being done right. Whatever was on line 4 that night, it showed up, it did the shift, it contributed. And then at some point between 3:30 and when Tanya and I walked back to line 4, it was gone. I've worked a dozen facilities since. I check the sign-in log every night. I know every face on the floor by the end of the first week. I do not let anyone work next to me for 5 hours without knowing their name and their shift history. I'm not doing that again. But sometimes, on the long stretches between 2 and 4 a.m., when the machines are running and the floor has a rhythm and everything is going correctly, I find myself glancing at the station next to mine just to make sure it's the right kind of empty, just to make sure whoever is there has a face I can describe